Jerusalem to Damascus. Yeah, big star on the way. He gets saved. And from Damascus, he goes where? Arabia for how long? 3 years. Meets camels. That's all he meets over there. Doing an MDiv program. For 3 years. Comes back to where? Damascus. And gets lowered over the wall in a basket. And then goes to Jerusalem, where he stays for 15 days. Yeah, what up, Pete? What does what up, Pete mean? Somebody explain that, because Mrs. Ty was not here last time, and she needs to know. So someone exegete what up, Pete, for her, please. Who can do it? Ryan. Perfect. Yeah, that's good. So the point is, it's not like this big meeting of these great theological minds, because Paul is still very much a newbie. Okay? So then that plays into the reading, I think, that you read. I hope you understand how that plays into it, right? So it's not like he's going to drop this bombshell of his gospel on Peter at that point, probably. Okay, so then he gets sent off away to Tarsus, where he probably stays for 10 years, somewhere between there and Antioch. And now the years have passed a great deal. It's probably 46 or 47 AD, and we started out around 35. So 10 years have passed. We don't hear from him at all. He's simply involved in children's ministries and VBS and stuff like that. 5% serious, 5% facetious, 95% serious. He's just doing ministry in the church. He is not a bigwig. He hasn't attained that goal, that stature yet. He hasn't written any books. He's still kind of a nobody. And in fact, from the book of Acts, well, I'll tell you that later, what a nobody he still is. So the next time we see him after Antioch is where? Famine relief visit, right? And do you know where this shows up in Galatians? Where's the famine relief visit in Galatians? Can you give me a chapter and verse? 2, 1 to 10. Yeah, 2, 1 to 10, right? That's the famine relief visit. So after the famine relief visit, they have this private meeting, and then they head back to Antioch. They, being Barnabas and Paul, and they actually take John Mark. That's not a detail you need to know for this, but they do. So then they decide, they don't decide, the Spirit decides it's time for the first missionary journey. So they go, first of all, to where? Yeah, to go to Cyprus. And part of the reason they go to Cyprus is probably because it's Barney's hometown. Yeah, home country, home island, okay? So then we go to the cities of, in order, Perga, Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. Retrace our steps. Get back, and when you've gone on a long trip like that, you are hungry, and obviously you go to Pizza Hut, of course. And he walks in and he finds Peter where? In the non-Gentile section, has a big row, calls him a hypocrite, some pretty direct language. You hypocrite, you know better, you've done the wrong thing. And then the big bombshell really happens, and that's this. You know, a couple people from Judea, probably. I don't know this for sure, because what we don't know about these troublers in Galatia is astounding. You know, I'm kind of making this part up. But I'm guessing, based on Paul's other clues, that they probably come from here. Nobody else is as interested in Jewish matters as people from Judea. So they go up there, and they probably say to him something like this: we come straight from Mother Church. Paul's gospel is simply false. If it were true, we would have heard of it before now. I hope that means more to you now after the reading than it did before. Okay. So at that point, then the news reaches Paul there in Antioch, and it's like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? I'm going to have to do something I never thought of doing before. I'm going to write a letter. And he writes his very first letter to the Galatians. And then hopefully it straightens them out, but there's still another group of people we have to straighten out, and that happens here in Acts chapter 15. Yeah, good. Okay, now, I don't know any other way to teach you this lesson. It's hard to do it in an absolutely linear way because there's so many different pieces of the pie that fit together. So I'm just going to go at another piece that you probably know, but maybe haven't seen it pictured this way. And let's just talk about the gospel and what it looks like through time, okay? So this gospel, that a Messiah is going to come and people will be saved by faith, where is that gospel first heard? We talked about it a little bit last time. Don't be embarrassed just to say that. What was it? From where? Yeah, and probably this is from Genesis 3:15, right? Or Genesis 12 or whatever. And you certainly see not Paul, you see Abraham doing it at Genesis 15:6. He believed God and it was reckoned him as righteousness. And Paul cites that as an early spot. So then by Acts chapter 1, just think about this carefully. By Acts chapter 1, how can we fill in the chart? What more do we know? Acts chapter 1. What else how can we populate the chart and make it clear? What other information do we now have? His name is Jesus. We don't have to call him Messiah. We can just call him Jesus. And anything else? Okay, that's Acts chapter 2. Holy Spirit's coming. Okay, all right. Let me say it like this. The crucified, resurrected Jesus is Messiah. Okay, that's kind of important when it comes to the salvation message, right? The crucified, resurrected Jesus is Messiah. Now then, the bigger question is, what are we going to do this chart by the time we get to Acts chapter 9? Now, Acts chapter 9, now we're talking about Paul. Okay, so feel free to tell me everything you know now. What's Paul going to do to this gospel? What are we going to do to the chart to put Paul's understanding of it on here? Yeah, you got to add that to it, right? Gentiles are now first class. Still, the core of the gospel is being saved by faith, by grace through faith through the Messiah, and now we're adding to it this component of Gentiles are in fact first class. So when I put those two up there, Galatians chapter 1 is only this, for all the Judeans know, and Galatians chapter 2 can only be this. Do you know where to draw the arrows? Galatians 1. Let's talk about Galatians 1. All the information shared in Galatians 1 that Paul explains about himself is what? No clues? Joe? Yeah, I think it's going to point towards the inner circle. Now, what might be confusing about that is Paul says in Galatians 1:15, God called me to go to go to the Gentiles. But the whole point of the rest of the chapter is he didn't tell anybody, right? So in chapter 1 in Galatians, that's about all we know about the gospel. But Galatians chapter 2, boom, all of a sudden that stuff starts showing up. Okay? So after you see this, does this make sense? Okay, does it jive with what you read last time? Okay, so when we talk about Paul's gospel and Jesus' gospel, you understand the difference? Jesus' gospel is, trust me, I'm the Messiah. I can save you by grace through faith. Paul adds to that the Gentiles, because Jesus never talked about Gentiles. Right? I'm only sent to the lost sheep of Israel. Okay. So, then, circumcision, baptism, no circumcision. Let me get on to this. The big point of this is to continue to drive home the progressive nature of how this whole thing gets revealed. So I want to go back, as we have been doing ever since the story of Hebrews, and do our best not to transport everything we know about the New Testament back into AD 33. Specifically, Matthew 28, 19, and 20. Go into all the nations and preach the gospel. So, let's think about that. Remember where we are now. You can discipline yourselves to think about this carefully. We're not in Acts chapter 9 yet. We're not even in Acts chapters 10 and 11 yet. In Acts chapter 1, when Jesus says, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all nations, how do you suppose they took that? What do you think they expect? What do you think they expected him? What did they think he wanted them to do? Andrea? Yeah. Yeah, it might be go tell all the Jews in the diaspora. And if it included preaching the gospel to Gentiles, what would it have looked like in their minds? probably be circumcised, proselytize them, right? Not in any kind of Pharisaical, works-oriented way, but in the natural step, right, which you do as an expression of obedience, the same way we would want to baptize them. Okay? So they probably take it as proselytize all nations. And what I want you to see here is when I say the men from Judea, I'm talking about typical religious, faithful people from Judea, not particularly the apostles, but those people have that sense of how things should go for how long? Probably a long time, right? Probably a long, long time. So now let's go back up to the top of the chart up here and talk about when Paul talks about my gospel, okay? So when he talks about my gospel, he's probably talking about this, this blue addition to everything that's going on. Happens up here, starts up here in chapter 9. In chapters 10 and 11, Peter tells everybody about it, but Paul hasn't told everybody about it. It's still private there. When you get to chapters 11 and 12, what incident are we talking about there? Now, this is Acts 11 and 12. Where are we in Galatians when we're in Acts 11 and 12? You guys you gave me the answer just before. This is the famine relief visit, okay? The famine relief visit, it's still private because he says, we told these people, but it was still private. Then finally in 13 and 14, the first missionary journey, Paul's message becomes very public, but that's in Asia, not in Judea. And it doesn't become, and that's when we got lots of butches around, okay? And not until Judea does it become, not until 15 does it become public here. So that's why these guys are saying, what? What in the world's going on here? We've never heard about this before. And so those are the dynamics you have to keep going and keep in your mind. And that, again, explains an awful lot of the background, right? This part good? Questions about this at all? Or are you happy? Yeah.
Where does Paul talking to Peter and James and John fit in on here?
When he is talking to, well, it depends on which time you're talking about. Because there is a time right here in 9, when probably right in here in 37, when he comes back from Damascus.
Right.
The 15-day visit?
I think the other one in Galatians 2 where
Yeah, that would be this one right here.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep, that's right there. So this one in 37 is the 15-day visit. This is the famine relief visit. Mm-hmm. This one's private. This one is very private. And even then, as we're going to find out, I don't think Paul probably told him what he knew. All right? He was still trying to get past that thing. Can I really trust you? Are you sure about this? You're a traitor. I'm not sure I believe anything you have to say. Right? Okay. If you're good with that, then let's do this. Let's take 10 minutes and go through those study questions if you need them. Do you need 10 minutes to go through the study questions? Our time is about up, and having gone through the class, I think we should take a little bit of time to actually review these questions. Because although I think you were close on them, not a lot of people were real confident, and there was a little bit of fuzziness. So if I go too fast, stop me, and I'll explain some more. Because it takes a while for all this stuff to kind of sink in, especially the political situation. Some of you are becoming aware of that, about how incredibly, well, we studied in Hebrews, right? When the writer of Hebrews says, this is going to rock your world, this is hard to take, I know it's going to blow you away, you're finding the same things here when even the Gentiles are coming in. This idea of Gentiles being first class and equal is really hard to take. And that's why not just anybody can do it. And that's why Paul can't do it, because he's a nobody. So he might know first, but he isn't the one that God uses to open the door, because he's just a renegade, rebel, suspect, naive, freshman, what up, Pete kind of guy. For much, much longer than you would think, right? He doesn't have a halo around his head immediately. It takes a long time for that to happen. So if you keep that in your mind, you can kind of understand how the process goes, and that's why Paul may know first, but God does not let Paul tell anybody until he finally lets Peter, the 25-pound sledgehammer, the guy who has the gravitas, the tough guy, not just the tough guy, but the guy who has the credibility, the one who was at Jesus' side, his right-hand man, the head Jewish pope. Okay? That guy is the one that God chooses to open the door to the Gentiles through with Cornelius. And when he comes back to Jerusalem, man, even there he's on the hot seat. If it's hard for Peter to accomplish that, there's no way Paul would have ever made that happen. Okay? So that's part of the reason for the timing here. So even as soon as Paul knows on the road to Damascus or over those next 3 years, becomes clear to him as he thinks through, he's not telling everybody. And we know that because in Acts chapter 9, there in Damascus, I pointed this out to you, maybe you didn't see the significance of it, he went around proving everywhere that Jesus is the Christ. Now what part of the gospel is that? Red or blue? Just the red. And then 3 years in Arabia, he comes back and he goes down to Jerusalem and he's still preaching heavily. Acts chapter 9, what's he preaching? That Jesus is the Christ. Right? That's the red part of that gospel message. Okay? No blue stuff yet. All right. So again, having said that, let's start out then. Number 1, in which chapter, 1 or 2, is Paul's gospel more clearly and fully presented? And the answer is 2. Yeah. And let me just, we're gonna do this in a little bit. Going to do this in a little bit, but let me just hit the highlights here. Notice that he says in verse 13, oh, sorry, somebody has to tell me when I do this, when I mess up. Daniel, it's your job, and you know it's your job to let me know when I'm messing down here and it's not showing up there. Okay. Screw up your courage and say, Dr. Miller, you're being an idiot again. Practice it. Try it. I know it's hard for you. That's why I'm making you do it. All right. Verse 13. You've heard of my former way of life in Judaism, how I was savagely persecuting the church of God and trying to destroy it. Okay? He's against the church. And then at the end of this whole chapter, I think it's down here, you get this amazing statement in verse 23. They were only hearing, the one who once persecuted us is now proclaiming the good news of the faith he once tried to destroy. So the only thing that he was angry with the church about was one thing. What was that one thing he was angry with the church about in verse 13 and here? Was he angry with the church that they were allowing Gentiles into it? In 35 AD. Was he angry with the church because they were accepting Gentiles? No. That's way too early. It had nothing to do with Gentiles. The reason why he was persecuting the church was one big reason. I didn't say this in the paper, I don't think, did I? Can you, well, okay, this is a big learning point then. Can you guess why Paul was so upset with the church, with the people who believed? What was he upset with them about? He said what? Yeah, exactly. The main thing he was upset with them about was that they thought that the Messiah could be crucified on a Roman cross. Right? To think that the ultimate Messiah would be humiliated and shamed and crucified like that was just completely wrong in his theology, which, is pretty amazing then, the way Paul actually does change his theology and learn the truth of Philippians 2. Who thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation and became obedient to the point of death on a cross. Right? That's the turnaround in his theology. So he thought, you think a Jewish man who's going to be king of Israel could be crucified by the Romans? That's horrible, and that's why he persecuted him so badly. It's such a shameful thing in that society. And so that's the thing which he hated them for. And then when we come down here, they were only hearing that the one who once persecuted us is now proclaiming the good news of the faith he once tried to destroy. So what that means is the guy who used to hate the idea of Jesus being the Christ is now in favor of Jesus being the Christ. Now, you understand what the word only means then, right? What does the word only mean? The only thing they heard about was the red part, not the blue part that went around it. Okay? We good? Okay. All right. So it's only in chapter 2 It's only when you get to chapter 2, and he gets up here and he says, then, after 14 years, I finally did what I haven't done before, and that is I presented the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. And you see all this stuff up here like Gentiles, and you see he wasn't compelled to be circumcised, and all that stuff. So the idea of the blue part gets really, really clear here in chapter 2. Okay? All right, let's go on then, number 2. Is Paul saying in chapter 1 that he, A, spent a small amount of time in Jerusalem, a normal amount of time, or a lot of time? Answer, A, small amount of time, just 15 days, just 15 days. And what result does that have for the people of Jerusalem and Judea? Yeah, they're not familiar with Paul. They don't know anything about him. The only thing they hear is, well, you guy used to be against us is now for us, but they don't know anything else about him or a special message or nothing. And you understand who he's directing this to. Well, he's writing this letter to the Galatians who have been told, no, we know Paul, and you misunderstood him. Paul says, they don't know me. They think they know me. They don't know me at all. Right? That's what that verse is all about. Okay, number 3. Paul's point in chapter 1 is that something really important did not happen. Very simple. So what was it? What did not happen? Mrs. Ty? That what? Yeah, he didn't tell people's gospel. Yeah. Brian, you with me or are you just stretching? Okay. He's stretching. He didn't tell people his gospel. So it shows up a little bit in English like this. When I did this, when I got this message, I did not go up to Jerusalem. And in verse 18, then after 3 years, I did go, but I didn't tell anybody. And then finally, then after 14 years, I finally did. Okay, so the main point is I didn't tell anybody, I didn't tell anybody, I didn't tell anybody. Then after 14 years, I did finally tell somebody. But what's the problem with his telling somebody in 2:1-10? What's the problem? It was a private meeting, right? So yeah, I did tell somebody, but they didn't tell anybody else. So that's why you wouldn't have heard, okay? So I think we've kind of answered number 4 now as well. Did Paul tell Peter about his gospel during the 15-day visit? Yes or no? Yeah, probably not at all. So give at least a couple reasons for your answer, and you can give probably 2 or 3 or 4. So answer number 1, how do you know that Paul didn't tell Peter about his gospel to the Gentiles here? Lots of different reasons. So let's just start. Seth? Yeah, number 1, Paul didn't have credibility for sure, right? He was suspect. Casey?
Peter hadn't heard about Paul's gospel until the vision that he receives from God. Chapter 10.
Yeah, exactly. You can't explain his aversion to the animals in chapter 10 if you already knew the story, right? And so, yeah, that's another reason. Stephen?
Kind of going off that, you wonder if he really fully would know it or understand it and then still do what he did in Galatians 2. You know, to have a full comprehension of what it means for the Gentiles to be grafted in.
Yeah, exactly. If he really knows this all this time, it's pretty hard to explain his hypocrisy in 2:1-10, right? I mean, 2:11-14. Yep. He does kind of minimize the whole thing. That's true. That's true. That's a good point. There's still another major exegetical point you guys haven't mentioned, which probably should be number 1 on here. Yeah, right. The word, he historeoed him. He learned from him, right? So the very wording, the very lexical nature of it is, I went to learn information from Peter. So what he's trying to say is, I didn't tell Peter a bunch of stuff. Peter told me a bunch of stuff. Now, get really, really practical about this and imagine what their conversation was like. You know, if you're a bug on the wall during these 15 days and the two of them are talking, who's going to say what? I mean, seriously, think about it. You can figure it out.
Peter was probably telling what happened when Jesus was still alive.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Isn't that what you want to know? I mean, if you got a chance today to sit down with Peter, what would you ask him about? Tell me about Jesus. Tell me about what it was like when you were sinking out there in the water, right? Would you like to hear that story firsthand? I've heard it preached 100 times, but tell me the real thing, okay? That's what I'd want to know. And tell me, what was it like when the water got turned to wine there? And yeah, I mean, there is all kinds of stuff that Paul, who was not in the inner circle, wants to know from Peter, and it makes total sense that he'd just sit there and soak it up for 15 days, okay? And never feel the need to try to say, hey, by the way, I've got this mind-blowing thing you're never going to believe, right? It's just not going to happen. I mean, haven't you ever been there? Haven't you ever been there in a situation like that where you had some information, but you knew your boss wasn't going to like it, and so you just kind of didn't mention it? Yeah. Or you feel like you know the right answer now, but you're not going to bring it up now because you know I'm not going to take it, or something like that. You know what I mean. And that's exactly the situation we are. So yeah, I think those are a couple of reasons. So at least, number one, the language says he learned from him. Number two, it's very difficult to explain Acts chapter 10, and Peter says, no, I'm not going to eat that, if he already knew. Number three, he didn't have any stature. And again, the text in Acts chapter 9 keeps saying the only thing Paul was telling anybody was Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is the Christ. Okay. So then the answer to number 7 is easy now. Who's the first person in the New Testament to know Gentiles were? And the answer is Paul, and you know that because you know that 9 comes before 10. Right? 9 comes before 10. If you were shaky on that before, know it now. So who's the first person in the New Testament to tell others, and we've been through that enough by now, Peter is the one that God tasks providentially to do that. And let's go back to that timeline. Notice once again, this is why you can't know the chronology too good. It's impossible to know this too well. Notice the timeline. How long is it between this 15-day visit and when God chooses to open this message up to everybody? The 15-day visit is not up there. You just have to figure it out. But you can figure it out. What year is the 15-day visit? Probably 37, right? 3 years after. In Jewish reckoning, you can count the beginning and end years. So you can count 35, 36, and 37. It's probably in 37. So that's 37. Cornelius doesn't happen until probably at least 40. So it's another 3 years before God even moves on the heart of Peter and Cornelius and has that Gentile Pentecost in Acts chapter 10. So God's not in any big rush to blow this thing up, right? He's taking his time. He's calling Paul and maturing him and teaching him, and then when God gets around to it in his own good time, Cornelius gets the Spirit on him. Okay? So where are we next? Number 9. According to Galatians, who were the first people that Paul told about his gospel, and when was this? So how did you answer number 9? According to Galatians, who were the first people that Paul told? Yeah, according to that, it's the first time he tells anybody is 47, right? In the famine relief visit. He tells them, but he even tells them privately. And you can either say famine relief visit, or you can say Acts 11 and 12, or you can say 47 AD, or you can say Galatians chapter 2, 1 to 10. Yeah. Okay. Number 10. So we could freeze a video of Jesus preaching the gospel when he was on the earth and compared it to Paul's. In what ways would they have sounded similar? In what ways would they have differed? They would have sounded similar in what? Yeah, both preaching about Jesus and preaching what? Yeah, salvation by faith, right? Mm-hmm. Steve?
They both reached out to all sorts of groups of people. So Jesus would spend time in houses of Pharisees and in houses of sinners.
Mm-hmm.
All in the same way to be able to interact with people of all sorts of different scales.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. But the thing that was unique about Paul, of course, was going to the Gentiles. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So then, number 11, the bonus. Why, if Paul's gospel is confirmed by John and Peter at the famine relief visit, why wouldn't this endorsement have been enough for the message to have been broadcast to the area of Galatia. So we can, I suppose, go back here. Oops, I went the wrong way. Well, I guess I can go that way. Yeah. So if that's the case, why would that message in 47 AD not be enough for the people in Judea and Galatia to have heard? Again, because it was a private meeting, right? And that's why he tells you it's a private meeting. Nobody'd heard about it yet. Okay. So all of this is going to answer this objection, I think, about this. Man, we would have heard about it before now. And Paul says, no, you wouldn't have. Right? So all kind of reasons why you wouldn't hear about it. All right? Yeah, Ryan? Oh, why wouldn't they have told him? Oh, okay, good question. Why wouldn't they have told him about this? And I think probably the best answer is this. Again, you have to begin to understand the political pressure of the time. And there are two things I want to show you about the political pressure. And the first one is this. When Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he clearly had done wrong, right? He's going to the non-Gentile section. Now, why does he do that? Well, he does that because he was afraid of those who were pro-circumcision. He was afraid of the peer pressure of the guys who came from Jerusalem. Now, I'll bet you that goes against how you think about Peter, doesn't it? Don't you think about Peter as the ultimate guy who can stand up to Jesus and say, no, you shouldn't do this, and rebukes the Son of God? Right? I mean, that's the image you have in your mind of Peter. But yeah, Peter was like that occasionally on some good days, but this is a pretty typical day for Peter. He's afraid like anybody else is, and there is enormous political pressure for continuing the traditions. Remember, that's the whole point of the intertestamental period, and the Gentiles, and the hatred towards Gentiles, and the protections set up to protect Jewishness. And so this is not an easy thing. It would have been very easy for people to say, if they were broadcasting this stuff freely and openly, it'd be very easy for people to say, you're doing the same thing that Antiochus Epiphanes did. And he has to be really, really careful about that charge. Right? And so he's very nervous about it. And so remember, even as, I don't have it up there now, but even as the door is opened with Cornelius, remember what kind of a guy Cornelius was, right? He was a really nice Jewish Gentile. Really, really nice guy. And so probably up here in Antioch, you might have had some butches at the table, which might have been the reason why Peter said, man, I just can't, just not sure I can go that far. Cornelius, that was good, man. He didn't smell like bacon. But these guys, oh, man, it's maybe just to be safe, I'll pull over. Right? And in fact, notice what else it says. And the rest of the Jews also joined with him in his hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray with them by their hypocrisy. My goodness, think the peer pressure for Barnabas to give in to this too. Right? So the original question was, why aren't they broadcasting this in Judea? So let's go back there to this. Did you ever notice this? You notice it 3 times there? When we finished with that private conference, we said, okay, Paul, you can go to those uncircumcised people, and we'll go to the circumcised. And Paul, you go to the Gentiles, and we'll just go to the Jews. And by the way, just in case we haven't made ourselves clear, Paul, you go to those Gentiles, and we'll go to the Jews. 3 times. 3 times. That's why I say that God's role here for Peter is to open the door. But Peter doesn't bust through it. Paul, who's already got this momentum going, busts through it. And he's the one who actually says, this is my gospel because I was called specifically to go to Gentiles and nobody else is. And even though Peter opens the door, I'm the one whose mission it is, and whose mission life it is to make this thing happen, and I'm going to do that. Right? But it wasn't theirs, and so that's why they weren't doing it. And so that's why it was not broadcast down there in Jerusalem, in Judea, and that's why it was not a very popular thing. And again, even when Acts 21, when Paul comes back, James and Peter have to say, Paul, we've got thousands of Jewish people who are zealous for the law, and they're kind of nervous that you're here because we've heard these stories about you. you know. Right? So let all that political pressure sink in. Okay. And another way you can think of it is this: think about how long ago Martin Luther King had his day. And civil rights went through a big deal in the 60s, but we've got it totally covered now, right? Right? I mean, we're through that. We don't have any kind of Fergusons or anything like that. That's not happening. We're done. We've learned. We've moved on as a society, right? Societies don't do that. Or again, how long has this society had this two-class distinction between Jews and Gentiles? 1,500 stinking years. Right? It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. So that's what's going on here, right? Okay, you want to go through Galatians 1 now for a little bit? Do you guys have your Galatians 06 exposition out? Oh, what a great man. Ben is such a good student. See this? Look, he's got it there. Do we all have it? If you don't, make sure you get it, okay, because this is what I want to go through right now. In fact, that's what you've got going on up here. So let's walk through. Hopefully by now, this will be the last piece in the puzzle, and hopefully it'll make sense. If it doesn't make sense yet, let's go to it, and let me just give you a couple of notes and move through here quickly, and hopefully it'll all make some sense. So, there we go. Let's start out with the introduction here pretty quickly. Paul is an apostle. So if you gave me a one-word synonym for apostle, or one-word definition, do you know what the biggest idea of apostle is? There's one word you should think of, and it starts with A. Authority, right? He has the authority. When he says he's an apostle, it doesn't just mean one who is sent. It doesn't just mean one who has seen the risen Lord. It means one who is sent with the full authority of the sender. Which is why he is not an apostle from human agency, but by Jesus Christ, which means he has the full authority of the sender, which is why he can write Scripture. He can write Scripture. Whatever he writes, it has the full authority of Jesus behind it. Okay? We actually have a legal term for that kind of thing in our legal lease today. Do you know what it would be? What's that? A master? Ambassador? Oh, yeah, ambassador would be close. Ambassador would be close. But if you ever had a parent or grandparent who was not able to do their business and your parents had to write checks for them, you know what this is called? Power of attorney, exactly, right? So I can sign my dad's name and it's fully binding as if he had done it. So that's what an apostle is, like someone with power of attorney who can speak for and write for Jesus, okay? And God the Father who raised him from the dead. The resurrection is always the ultimate miracle which proves that Jesus is Messiah. I don't mean to minimize it, but we got a lot of those stuff to go on to, so I trust you know that. The resurrection is the ultimate miracle that proves he was Messiah. And this is interesting too, verse 2, and all the brothers with me. Now normally Paul's apostolic authority would be enough to carry the day, but remember, he's just barely an apostle at this point. Oh, the thing I didn't tell you about Acts, which I probably should have, is this. Let me go back and tell you this. Steve, you want a chance to show off? The answer is yes, you want a chance to show off. Okay. On the first missionary journey, when the two of them, Barnabas and Saul, leave Antioch and they go to Cyprus, how does Acts describe, Steve, the two of them going there? Who technically goes to Cyprus? What's that?
They sent Barnabas first and Saul with him.
Yeah, Barnabas and Saul with him. And who leaves the island of Cyprus?
Saul and Barnabas. Or Paul.
Exactly right. Did you catch that? Luke makes that distinction. It's really, really powerful. In that island, Paul blinds a guy whose name is Son of Jesus, Bar Jesus, and he really kind of takes the lead. And so, get this, Luke says Barnabas and Saul went to the island, and Paul and Barnabas left it. And that's the way it always is from then on. But realize that's only a year before he writes this letter, right? Up until that point, he was still the understudy of Barnabas. Okay? So, That's why it's kind of funny here that he says, oh, and all the brothers with me. Because he still is not the ultimate big apostle and kind of will take all the encouragement he can get, okay? Grace and peace to you from God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. We can talk about that more in Romans. Who gave himself for our sins to rescue us from this present evil age. We talked about this being an interim time period. And Paul says, man, the kingdom is not here yet. We're not in the Old Testament. We're not in the kingdom. But we're in a different interim time period that's still evil, okay? That purple period, if you remember the way the PowerPoint went. Now, soup Nazi. No Thanksgiving for you. I want to talk about this for a second because this is the spot where you would expect to get it. In all of Paul's other epistles, there is some sort of thanksgiving for the people there, and he applauds them and encourages them. It's just always there, except for this one, and it's not here. No thanksgiving for them, and it is all of those things. It is like, oh no, this is terrible. He just immediately goes into chastising them, right? And let me just say a word about tone. Part of the reason why he does that is not, I don't think, because he's not thankful for them, although you might think that's true. It's not because it's just his first letter and he hasn't established the pattern yet, though there may be some truth to that. The biggest reason why there is no thanksgiving here is because this book, more than anything else that Paul writes, is an absolutely urgent thing. He is afraid the world is going to end, because it almost is. When you get into it and see what's really going on here, the world is just about to end. And Paul is absolutely hyper in this book, much more than any other. He is just out of his mind. He will say stuff here that no good professor or pastor would ever want to say in public. You know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, the very first bit here, he says, man, I wish they'd go to hell. Well, he says it slightly differently. He says, I wish let him be condemned to hell, right? But go to hell, first thing he says. Chapter 3, you morons, you idiots, you fools, right? And then it gets even worse after that. I'm talking about circumcision. He says, man, I wish they'd just go the whole way and cut themselves off. He didn't really say it. Yeah, he did. He did. Now, there's some deeper stuff going on there about, I'll tell you about deeper theological stuff, but man, he just says, I wish they'd castrate themselves. And you look at this and you think, my goodness, I can't believe he said it. Yeah, he did. Because this is so urgent. Because if in the infancy of the church we get this thing wrong, we've messed it all up. And this is not just about Gentiles. This is much more than that. This is about God's entire program. Because Paul's so excited. One of the greatest things about Galatians is getting into this and watching how this is his main focus for the letter is going to be Genesis 12:3. Because it goes back that far. You know when that thing happened about Babel, a few years ago? God planned a fix for that. And don't you know it's happening right now? And God's taking all those nations of the world and putting them back together. And by golly, if you get in the way of it, you're standing in the way of God himself. You're so getting in the way of the program of God that I'm going to say, the worst things I can say about you because you are absolutely against God. Right? And he's kind of drawing a little bit here on Peter. And not Peter, but on Jesus, right? Where Jesus looks at Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. Now, I'm sure everybody who was around there thought, oh, well, that was mean, that was rude. No. What Peter was saying was absolutely contrary, diametrically opposed to the purposes of God in Jesus going to Calvary. And so Jesus said to him explicitly, I'm sorry, man, you are on the side of the enemy right here. That was you don't understand. I mean, you were trying to be well-meaning, but that was a bad statement. That was a satanic kind of statement, Peter. And Paul's saying the same thing. You don't understand this. You just think, the Gentiles, let them be second class. No. That is contrary to God's overwhelming program, which he has finally brought together here in Christ. And somebody who says that is completely opposed to the purposes of God and doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. So, do we have time for Thanksgiving? I'm sorry, we don't. Let's get right on to it, okay? That's Paul's attitude. So, we get right into this then, and he says, I am astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you by the grace of Christ. Now, what I want you to see here is that far different than thanksgiving, he actually is insulting them to a little bit. So look at the text here or in your page, wherever you want to, and tell me in what ways does he insult them or deride them or chastise them, whatever word you want to use. You tell me, and I'm gonna get to mark up the text here in front of us, okay? In what ways does he express disappointment with them? Ryan? Okay, now don't go too far. Just give me a chance here. He's number one, he's astonished. Yep. What else? I mean, just read it. Look at the words. I'm amazed. I can't believe you do that. You know, that kind of tone. And then what? Yeah. Well, let me say deserting first of all, because that's a really strong word. Break it up here. Deserting is a really strong word, but it's not just you're deserting. You are quickly deserting. Right? I am astonished. You are so quickly deserting what? Notice what they're deserting. It's not just the grace of Christ. You are deserting the one. You're deserting the one who called you. You're deserting God. Right? And in fact, you are following a different gospel. That is, not that there really is another gospel, but there are some who are disturbing you, right? So you get the sense here in the beginning, he is really, really saying, calling them to task and saying, look what you're doing. I can't believe you're doing so fast. You're so quickly deserting. And then he's upset with the people who are causing him trouble. And what two things does he say they're doing? Do you notice this? They're doing two things. What are they doing? Number one, they are disturbing you. And number two, they are distorting the gospel of Christ. Okay? So he's not very happy with them either. And then again he says, if we or an angel should preach a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be condemned to hell. And then he says the whole thing again. By the way, very quickly here, do you know why it's such a bad thing to tell someone to go to hell? Besides the fact that your mother told you not to say it, or maybe you didn't, but maybe she heard kids who said it. Why is it a bad idea to tell someone to go to hell? Ultimately. Exactly. Only God can say that. Only God has the authority to do that. So if that's true, and it is absolutely true, and that's why does Paul do it here? Because he's got that authority, right? He's speaking for God here. Yeah. Okay, now, not that they do. He's just saying, man, I wish if they're going to keep on this gospel, they're keeping people from going to heaven and going to hell. So, am I now trying to gain the approval of people? Now, do you understand here why someone might make that charge against him? Am I trying to gain the approval of people? In what sense is he trying to take it easy on people? Exactly. Yeah. It's like, okay, the Gentiles are not having to be circumcised, so you're trying to win their approval. But the trouble is that by doing that, Paul calls down so much trouble on his head by the Jews that it's really not worth it. So Paul says, do you really think I'm trying to please people? If I were trying to please people, I'd never go with this gospel, because this causes more trouble than anything I've ever seen before. Right? I'm not trying to please anybody. I'm not trying to please Jews or Gentiles here. I'm truly trying to please Christ, and that's who I'm a slave of. Now, let me get to this. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, the gospel I preached is not of human origin. So you can explain that, right? You can explain how he did not receive it or learn it from any human source. Define the gospel here that Paul says he didn't receive from any human source. There's only one thing it can be. Give me the complete gospel. Are you just being shy? Or give me a definition of the gospel so that I understand verse 12. The gospel that I preach, Casey?
The message of Jesus plus the law-free gospel for the Gentiles.
Exactly. All right? It's the message of justification by faith through Jesus. That's all there, but it's not only there. Because he could have gotten that for the last 1,500 years, last 3,000 years, whatever. It is the message of justification by faith and Gentiles being equally first-class heirs with them.
Do you think that like American racism today would carry the same weight as like this racism did back then?
Did you hear what he's had to say? Are you going to answer it for me? Or ask another question?
I kind of want to answer, but I would say yes because you look at the civil rights movement, and I mean, it kind of was. If you look at the readings of Martin Luther King, it's very evident that he's trying to draw not a social thing, but he's drawing on the Bible because the authority that he calls on isn't that of any political thinker or philosopher of the Bible.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of politics going on in Martin Luther's writing, but it's also pretty much more biblical than you might think, or might first think. And to give you an answer is absolutely, I do think it is. Absolutely, I do think it is. And I don't think racism is a small thing at all. And I think ultimately, now I'm going to kind of spill the beans, which I shouldn't have done. I'm a bad teacher. Or a good teacher, I would make this dawn on you, but it looks like maybe it already has with some of you, that this is not just about Jews and Gentiles. This is about God putting the world back together. This should affect how we think of missions. It should affect how we think of the inner city. God leaves this book here so we can start to wrestle with all those different issues and realize how much he hates dividing people who are different. And if this book tells us about anything, it is about people who are legitimately different in their different cultures and not trying to monoculturize them, but to let them be different and bring them together in Christ anyway. Parker?
Isn't this more a matter of people already inside the church? People already, like you could equate the Jews or the church in this matter of people who are already inside the church rather than just racism as a whole political?
Yeah, it certainly is inside the church. And I don't want to say this is just trying to get rid of racism. This is God's answer to it. Right? This is a redeemed non-racism. You know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah. It's not just racism. It's this again, we're not trying to redo Babel the right way, where everybody gets along and together. We're trying to say when God redeems a heart and changes us in from the inside out, then we are thankful for the different kinds of people that God has brought and only included them together because we are in Christ. Yeah. So that's it. That's the only way it makes any sense. Otherwise, you have to say, gosh, and this is the chronological mistake we sometimes just assume ourselves into. The justification by faith only came with Paul. No, it's been around forever. Justification by faith and Gentiles being included, that is what we haven't seen, and that's the nature of the gospel here, okay? So that's why he didn't receive it from Revelation. So I think now the rest of this is going to be fairly easy, right? You've heard of my former matter of life. I was savagely persecuting the church of God and trying to destroy it, and we already talked about why. It wasn't because they were interested in Gentiles at this point, because this is what, 35 AD. It's because they thought a crucified Messiah could be the Messiah. Because if you look back in Jewish studies, and Amy, I don't know how much Jewish studies you have done. Actually, I mean I know you got a good feel for living in Israel, but you go back to Jewish studies, and the imagination about the Messiah from the Old Testament was one who was totally victorious. He's going to come with a rod of iron and smash everything, and the obedience of the nations would be his, and he would take over, and he would be in charge, and he would put Israel back where they were supposed to be. And that's a very different place than we find ourselves in 36 AD, with Jesus, who came humbly on a donkey and submitted himself and got crucified, and is promising to come back again. Those things just like, oh gosh, you're just tearing the heart of the Old Testament if you believe in Jesus. And that's what Paul was upset with.
How did the Jews then
Yeah, good point. There were some people who understood parts of that and understood, well, maybe there are going to be two Messiahs, one who's victorious and one who suffers. But I think most people would say this is probably referring to the nation. Because, again, that's the way our minds work, right? You're thinking about dating somebody and you're getting mixed signals and you try to ignore the negative ones and just take the positive ones. Right? It's kind of the same thing. Okay, we know there's something suffering in there, but we're not quite sure what's going on with that, and maybe it's just David talking.
Because there's much more talking more about like the kingdom and the setup.
Exactly. Well, sure, and you see that attitude in the disciples too. Are you gonna? Can we sit at your right hand and your left? Huh? No. Right. Will you at this time restore the kingdom of Israel? Huh? No. And then he leaves. Yeah, good point. Right? You're just happy. You just wave them to me. Okay, let's do this then. Let's finish this next time. And there is some more reading for you. And it is not easy. There's still a couple of hard readings to come. I kind of not sorry, apologize about that. But let me say this. After we've gone through chapters 1 and 1.5 here, we're going to start getting into the deeper theology of the book, otherwise known as faith and works. Now, before you leave, let me ask you a very, very, very evil question. So at least I've warned you. I'm going to ask you a really evil question. Okay? Have you been redeemed from the curse of the law? Galatians chapter 3. Have you been redeemed from the curse of the law? Anybody want to answer this? Talk about peer pressure. Who's been redeemed from the curse of the law? A couple people raise their hand. Nobody wants to. But it's a trick question. Yeah, it is. It is. It's a trick question. Have you been redeemed from the curse of the law? We all assume we have, right? Do that reading.